Thank you for listening to this worship podcast of St. Andrew Lutheran Church. I am Peter Johnson, Interim Senior Pastor. We hope this recording provides you with a moment of God's grace wherever this finds you. Know that you're welcome to join us in person for worship in Eden Prairie on Sunday mornings at 9 or 10:30. And also know that any contribution you make will bolster St. Andrew's ministry and outreach, including our podcasting directly to you. You can do so online. Welcome and God's blessings to you.
Our reading this morning comes from the Gospel of Luke, the 2nd chapter. The child grew and became strong, filled with wisdom, and the favor of God was upon him. Now every year, Jesus' parents went to Jerusalem for the festival of the Passover. And when he was 12 years old, they went up as usual for the festival. When the festival was ended and they started to return, the boy Jesus stayed behind in Jerusalem, but his parents did not know that. Assuming that he was in the group of travelers, they went a day's journey. Then they started to look for him among their relatives and friends. When they did not find him, they returned to Jerusalem to search for him. After 3 days, they found him in the temple, sitting among the teachers, listening to them and asking them questions. And all who heard him were amazed at his understanding and his answers. When his parents saw him, they were astonished, and his mother said to him, "Child, why have you treated us like this? Look, your father and I have been searching for you in great anxiety." And he said to them, "Why were you searching for me? Did you not know that I must be in my Father's house?" But they did not understand what he said to them. Then he went down with them and came to Nazareth and was obedient to them. His mother treasured all these things in her heart, and Jesus increased in wisdom and in years and in divine and human favor. The word of the Lord. Thanks be to God.
Good morning. Great to have you here again this summer Sunday morning. As Pastor Matthew mentioned, we're making our way through the good book, the Bible. And so we've covered much of the Old Testament already here as we have made our way through maybe some familiar passages, maybe some unfamiliar passages here this summer. And we shift gears to the New Testament. And while we're starting with the New Testament, we're not starting with a nativity narrative like the birth of Jesus, but a little bit later on, as Pastor Matthew read, as Jesus was reaching the adolescent stage. And so we continue this summer dibble and dabbling, hopscotching around in different places now in the New Testament with some familiar passages and not so familiar, and see how it flavors our life and our faith. So great to have you here this morning. You've probably been following in the news and in society a few things that social scientists are talking about here in our world today. One particular person that I've been following here more recently is Robert Putnam. So I don't know if this name rings a bell to you at all. He's a social scientist and an author. Here's a little bit of a background of why he is suddenly, as a senior person, a longtime researcher of the American culture, why he's back into talking about society. He is talking about loneliness and isolation. And at least for one, I'm a parent, so I have kids that are in their 20s and late teens, but of course we as a community want to make sure that we're thinking and thoughtful about the times when we hear about isolation and loneliness. We hear that these are the loneliest of times, the loneliness of generations, and so he is leaning back in, is this author, based on some prior research that he has done and moving forward as well. Back in 2000, he wrote a very provocative book called Bowling Alone. So this is 25 years ago almost now. He was specifically talking about the advent. Well, I can't summarize 600 pages of a book, but in general, broad brushstrokes. With the invention of the television and people gathering around their television sets in their own homes created a sense of isolation. And he was writing about how watching television has created some loneliness and isolation as we sit in our own homes and entertain ourselves with more and more time. Little did he know, of course, that only 7 or 8 years later, social media would pick up as the internet would get going and create a whole nother sort of a proof of his social, his research. And more recently, a book called The Upswing, that we are capable as people to rebound, and we have done so in the past. And in this book, he has a lot of that suggestions about how we could rebound to become more social and connected people. But his main term that I'd like to introduce to you here this morning is the bonding social capital. Bonding social capital. This is the type of friendship and relationship that you can think of as you think about your family members, your closest friends, the people with whom you share particular affinity. These are the people that are creating bonds of social capital. And of course, capital are things that we springboard from. He is all about this process of bonding social capital in a time of isolation and of loneliness. His strong words about making sure we're paying attention to bonding social capital. And so in today's passage, as we hear Pastor Matthew read, I know it's about Jesus as a young boy. I know it's about Jesus going to the temple and being with people and scholars and learning and teaching. And I know people were amazed. And I also know that his parents were particularly concerned that they had no idea where he went, and he got lost as he was in his own mind and his own circumstances. I wonder if any of us who have raised kids have ever had a child who's been off to their own things and done their own circumstances. That has certainly been the case for Michelle and me ourselves. But what I caught a hold of as I was thinking about this passage was not necessarily those stories about Jesus, but about how this story is the opposite of loneliness. And so I want to explain why, because it has to do with the context. Jesus, being raised in Nazareth with Mary and Joseph, is part of that small town community. And every few months, in fact, up to 3 times a year, the Jewish people would make their way down the roads from where they lived to Jerusalem. And they would never do that alone. Mary and Joseph would never go on the pilgrimage on their own, but they would always go with a group of people with them from Nazareth. And so a few points where Pastor Matthew was reading in our passage today, there is reference to the group of people with whom they are traveling. And I love this image of what it takes to be a community. It's a significant undertaking for them to make their way from Nazareth to Jerusalem. It might have taken several days or even weeks to make the travel from Nazareth to Jerusalem. And this group traveled from Nazareth for the purposes of safety, for the purposes of having companionship with one another, and to engage in this spiritual experience. In this case, it was going to Jerusalem for the Passover, and to experience it all together. It's like going on a trip with your nuclear family, but instead developing a trip to go with your broader family and experiencing it all together. They were doing so all as faithful people in a group, making their way down a road such as this in the Judean hills, making their way down to Jerusalem for this experience. And so my point here, as I think about what I've been reading about in terms of loneliness and isolation, that Jesus is surrounded by this community. A community of people who care for him, who love him, who probably all know him by name. And as Mary and Joseph are raising the other kids of the village, as the other parents are helping to be and to work alongside Jesus as well. This is a group of people that are doing life together. And so that is my point here this morning as I think about this passage and about how I want all of our kids and I want all of you to grow up in community. with people who love you, people who care for you, who understand you, so you can be part of a beloved place alongside others. So think about these things. In the church, we have several examples of what it means to be living in community. A new commandment said, Jesus, I give you, love one another. As I have loved you, so you must love one another in John 13. We know that one, perhaps, fairly common for us to know. Therefore, encourage one another and build each other up, just as in fact you are doing. Encourage one another, build each other up in community. Be of this mind as you live together as faithful people here at St. Andrew. And carry each other's burdens. And in this way, you will fulfill the law of Christ in Galatians 6. All kinds of references to what it means to be a community, a beloved community here at St. Andrew and in our faith. And so I want you to use this image here for a few points in the rest of my message here this morning. We don't see necessarily the V-shaped flocks of geese that are flying overhead here in late July, do we? It's more of a migratory patterns that the geese engage in at two other times of the year, but not necessarily this time of year. But we see this image quite a bit, don't we? And I think we understand, too, to some extent, why it is that they fly the way that they do. But I'm going to make some points around this together here about what it means to be Christian community. One of the things that scientists know is that when they fly in the V shape, the front goose there of all the geese is breaking the wind. And it is making it easier for those who are flying behind it. In fact, studies show that 70% of the energy that's expended to fly is saved because the geese fly in this kind of pattern. I was telling Michelle this a couple days ago, and she reminded me in our house about our electric vehicle that we drive and how I always prefer when we're on longer drives to drive behind someone because they are, breaking the wind for me. So I'm more energy efficient in that way than if I'm just going along at my own pace. Because I'm more interested in driving efficiently than I'm interested in driving fast. So Michelle, I think, likes to drive fast. I just, as she says, I just tailgate. I think that's what I do. But it's the headwinds that I'm talking about, and it's the energy that we expend in life when we encounter headwinds in life that slow us down, that make it harder to move forward. And I think we can come up in our own minds, in our own experiences, what kind of headwinds in our lives happen. How we have times in our lives where things are flowing easily, and then sometimes when headwinds come, speed bumps come along the way, and everyone who experiences these things isn't operating on the same kind of efficiencies. I think we know what that feels like. At 10:30, you'll notice that we have all of these signs set up here for each of the cabins at Spirit in the Pines, because we again will send off kids to Spirit in the Pines this morning. There are 121 kids going up this week for what we're lovingly calling Mega Week up at Spirit in the Pines. So this whole section is going to be full of Spirit in the Pines campers and counselors who are heading up north. And what I love about kids who are experiencing headwinds is that they can go up to this place and they can remove themselves from their storms. Or they can know and experience what it's like to put their phones away. They can get on board those coach buses that will be lined up perhaps as you're leaving the sanctuary here today, and they can go and find a place of peace up there. To be with God, to clear away all the other things, and let the peace of Christ that surpasses understanding inform them, relieve them. This is a picture of a campfire experience that happens there by Pleasant Lake at Spirit in the Pines. And you cannot explain this picture in 1,000 words of what it means to be in companionship with someone. Because if one of those two boys is sitting alone, it's one thing. But it's a whole nother thing when one of those boys is sitting with a buddy. This is what's happening at St. Andrew Lutheran Church. This is what it means to be the body of Christ as we counteract loneliness, as we counteract this circumstance in our society. And this is what happens. A picture tells 1,000 words. The other thing they say about the geese, and remember the geese image, the other thing they say about the geese is how important it is to share leadership so that not one person is doing all of the work. You know how the geese will rotate, right? There'll be one that will fly up there at the front of the V and take all of the brunt of the headwinds that are there. But the rest of the geese have an internal sense that there is the desire to rotate around so that others can bear the brunt as well, so that one does not become overly fatigued. That is the geese, and that is, I think, also the story of our community here. I can remember back in the day, and in fact, even Pastor Matthew was talking about this past week with one of their daughters at a camp in another part of the city, how great it is to carpool. Carpool is an example of allowing someone else to take leadership. Play dates for families with kids also is another way for someone else to take on leadership and be part of what it takes so that there can be a breath of fresh air in the midst of the busyness of life. If you have 2 kids, what's 2 more for an afternoon? But I was also struck, too, here at St. Andrew about how we had a story that's happening over the summertime that I wanted to share. On Wednesdays during the year, we have a Wednesday evening dinner here from 4:45 to 6:30 on Wednesday nights, and a lot of our early learning families pick up their kids and come right into the fellowship hall. There's a little FOMO going on with the kids. They all want to have dinner together before they all go home. It's a wonderful thing. But the program year came to a close in May, and so the dinners won't resume here until September. But this group of families who had been so accustomed to having dinner together on Wednesday afternoons have what? They've decided that they are going to rotate around to each member's homes of this family so they can continue that Wednesday night tradition all through the summer until St. Andrew offers the Wednesday night supper one more time, resuming here this fall. And so they are taking it upon themselves to have this experience continue on, sharing the leadership as the community of faith, letting others help out, prepare a meal at their house, then the next people prepare a meal. It is a bit like why Michelle and I, when we cook for 1 or 2 people, for 2 or 3 people in our house, why not cook for 3 or 4 or 5? If someone else is having to cook dinner too, why not have another couple around at the same time so not both couples are preparing meals themselves? The community, the beloved community, the community that assumes that others can take on leadership, breaks down those barriers of that capital, that social capital of bonding, and actually gets into the form of bridging social capital, which is another one of Putnam's main points as well. But sharing in the leadership is really important for those geese. But I also would say, too, that the geese are flocked together as well for protection and security. So it's harder for predators to do anything because there's too many birds and there's just too much going on. And I love how the people of God also experience what it means to be community together for our own sense of safety and our own sense of belonging. I can remember a few years ago, I had planned to make a fairly early morning visit to the hospital of a member who had emergency surgery. And so I had gotten up a little bit early, made my way to the hospital a little earlier than I normally would to catch him before my day set out. And I made my way upstairs at Methodist Hospital, and I got to his room, and I walked into his room, and in it were already 2 members of the St. Andrew softball team with whom he plays softball. And I quickly thought to myself, I am, as a pastor, doing my job, I love to do those kinds of things, and it's important to show the kinds of support and security and to give people a sense of belonging in that setting. But I quickly realized that my presence there was very duplicitous because there were already two other members of St. Andrew who were by Ron's bedside, giving him some care and support already. This is what the Christian community does. This is what Jesus was experiencing in that early upbringing when he was surrounded by people in Nazareth who took him seriously, who helped raise him, who brought him to Jerusalem and back from Jerusalem. Maybe they all lost track of Jesus in the process, and Jesus was emerging into his ministry as being the prophet and the teacher that he was, starting already to draw all people to himself. But it's the community around him that supported him, encouraged him, and blessed him, and modeled for us what it means to be part of a blessed community, a beloved community. About 14 months ago, I was invited to take part in a running group for men about my age. And I remember thinking to myself, as the pastor of service in small groups at the time, I already had a lot of small groups that I was involved in. I remember thinking, I'm too busy to think about getting up every Saturday morning at 7:30 and driving to Lake Harriet to join up with a group of men that I've never met before. I knew a couple of them who'd invited me. But I remember thinking to myself, this is not something that I want to do. I don't know if I want to make that commitment. But I joined the running group. I don't make it every week. But 9 times out of 10, when I get home, it's my spouse is the one who realizes the difference that it makes. They enjoy having a pastor in the group. There have been a couple of deaths in the family of this small group. There have been a couple of pretty significant surgeries in the group. And we might run our 3 miles or 5 miles on Saturday morning at 7:30. But the coffee period that we have afterwards and the care and support and the love that we provide, the encouragement that we find in each other is what becomes invaluable. It becomes the blessing. So as we think about loneliness and about isolation, we also think about community. And I ask the question, when was the last time you participated in real community? And be thankful for it. When was it that it sunk in well and hard and good? If you're lonely, there are opportunities to engage. We love all, and it's very easy these days to be lonely. But ultimately, we're enriched, we're enlivened, and we're given the grace and the love and the leadership and the sense of peace to know that we're part of God's beloved community. Think about these things as we continue the summer and roll into the fall, as we roll out a more robust understanding of who we are along with everyone else around us to strengthen and encourage each other in life and in faith. Amen.
Thank you for listening to this worship podcast of St. Andrew Lutheran Church. We hope that this recording provides you with a moment of God's grace wherever this finds you. Any contribution you make to St. Andrew will bolster our ministry and outreach, including our podcasting directly to you. You can do so online. Thank you for joining us for this podcast, and I wish you every blessing from Christ today.